Hi, this tutorial is dedicated to taking a design and cutting it up using Bootstrap version 5. We're going to build with Bootstrap alongside our own web projects files and not leverage a CDN. We're going to use a real-world design today and try to get really detailed and specific. My name is Marcel. I'm a lead UX engineer for a web agency in the United States. In Massachusetts, it's called iMark. Here is the design that we will cut up today. There's some gradients, negative image offsets, differing button styles, iconography, grid, all that good stuff that we can handle together. I'm going to assume that you are an intermediate or above Sass developer, that you understand package managers. This is going to be using Bootstrap's version 5 alpha release. Things might change down the line. I'm going to move fast and cover lots of ground, so the pause button might be your friend. By now, you probably heard from a manager or coworker, we should use Bootstrap. It's already built. This will save us time. We can have a system. And perhaps they've sent you documentation for different user interface elements, maybe even some templates that you can buy that look pretty good. Maybe even some Sketch and Adobe XD stencil sets. And if you're us as front-end developers, we feel a lot of anxiety, a lot of worry, and your response might be something out loud like, the designs I received don't really look like what's on the Bootstrap site. And inside you might be freaking. You might be saying, this will look templated, complicated, it's going to be a mess, I just can't do what I need to do. I think today you'll have some of that anxiety alleviated as we move forward here. So we're going to cover a lot of topics today. We're going to move fast. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, first up, let's get our code editor up and our browser up, and let's start to see some stuff in the browser. We will override some stock Bootstrap variables to see some changes. Then we'll go ahead and take some time to clean up our Sass architecture. Finally, we'll look at the Sass variables file that Bootstrap provides, which in some ways is almost like a command center for your web project. My coding environment for this tutorial is actually spun off of an official starter kit that Bootstrap provides on their GitHub. This is tailored for version 4, but we can have it work for version 5 very easily. I've downloaded this, I've run NPM install, and now I'm going to run the two scripts that load up our server and that will watch our Sass. So I'll do that first. So let's run npm run server. And then let's go ahead and open another terminal window and run npm run watch. Great. Let's open the default provided index.html file. We have something in the browser. To tailor this for Bootstrap version 5, we just want to go into the starter point Sass file they provide and just uncomment this root file. This is required for version 5, and you'll see the font face change here. Let's see some changes in the browser. Let's change the text color for our project to gold. And let's change the background color to navy. That's working. Maybe we can add some lorem ipsum into our paragraph tag here. And that's working too. Next step, we want to clean up the Sass architecture. Right now our entry point has a lot of things going on. It's not very clean. We have 4 default Bootstrap variables floating up here. We have the 2 options of how to include Bootstrap Sass. We have our custom styles, which is some padding on the body right now. So let's clean this up with a logical order. For a logical Sass architecture, I always look to Sass Guidelines 7.1 pattern for inspiration. We'll use a variant on this. We won't have 7 folders for our Sass, but we'll have about 5 with just one entry point. Let's go ahead and try to reorganize our architecture a little bit. Let's rename starter. Let's really own this and just rename this file to something like main.scss. And we'll go ahead and need to do that to the compiled CSS and the HTML, which is already done. And let's go ahead and make sure that our build tools are watching the correct file. And let me go ahead and paste in our new entry point file based on the 7.1 pattern. That really kind of abstracts our Sass files into logical folders here. So this is what our entry point will look like, and let me go ahead and drag in said folders from a temp folder I created here. So now we have 5 different directories. So our entry point is nice and clean. We have everything segmented. We have an abstracts folder, which is going to hold the variables and mixins for our Acme project. And that includes our Bootstrap variables that we're going to override, along with some other project-based stuff like font awesome stuff. We have a couple mixins in here that we'll talk about later for what we're building. Vendor folder, this is what holds all of the external libraries we might use that we pull in from NPM, say. So in this folder currently, one major thing I have, of course, is how I'm including the Sass from Bootstrap. And I'm only including what I need, and there's probably arguably a little bit more here than we required, but that's okay. I know you know what base is, and that's what lives in that folder. And then we have a components directory, which is dedicated to things like our hero that we'll build, and our layers, and our custom buttons. And then layouts is a generic, holds generic style structure elements like headers and footers and things of that nature. So we're all ready. We're in better shape for a cleaner architecture here. And let's just make one change. Let's just make sure everything is still working correctly. All right, we're in good shape to keep going. The last item to cover in our first section is that Bootstrap variables Sass file. This is like a command center for your web project, and Bootstrap has set it up in such a manner. It's very verbose, but you can change a ton of your interface using just the variables file. So we're going to go ahead and just rip it out, copy it into our own web project file so we can access it and see everything at once. Because we're including Bootstrap via NPM, we can go look at Bootstrap's native Sass files in the Node Modules folder and copy over their default variables file to our own file for our web project. I'll navigate to Node Modules and find Bootstrap's directory, and then I'll open their Sass directory. I'll find their variables Sass file, and you can copy all of that. Close this. Let's close Node Modules. It's a bit scary. Let's go back to our architecture for our project. If you'll remember, we're including our own Bootstrap variables override file. We have that in our abstracts directory. If I open that, we can see we are including that here with a comment on line 13. We're importing it there. So if I go to that file, I'll pretend I'm pasting it in, but I've already done that. You now have all the variables available at the ready, which I find is easier than going back and forth. Let's change those same variables at the beginning of this tutorial, along with one more for link color, and then I want to make one final note about the file paths we saw in our Sass files. So if I find the body background variable, we can go ahead and change this to something like gold. I can make sure that we can take out our CSS from our entry point. We now have a gold background, and how about we change the color of our copy here? Let's make that Peru. Cool. I want to just call out before we move on the file paths from our abstracts entry point file. You might be wondering about the import paths here, how we have our Bootstrap variables file in a variables folder here, but we're importing Bootstrap Sass from Node Modules without any sort of tilde or any sort of .. Node Modules, something like this. You get the idea. That's just due to the magic of Node Sass and the commands in the package JSON that the starter kit gives us from Bootstrap. So Node Sass has an include path flag that just says, hey, if you can't find that path, you're allowed to look at Node Modules. So that's how that works. Just wanted to call that out. All right, let's start building some areas of our comp. We'll start with the masthead, or header, and then we'll move on to the hero. We'll talk about the challenges of working with Bootstrap's block modifier naming convention for their HTML classes, and we'll visit responsive font sizing, which is much more than responsive just font sizes. It's a whole responsive engine, so you can make things like padding responsive as well. And along the way, we'll talk about some cool tools that help us out, like what are the color functions that are available in version 5, such as the contrast, shade color, and tint color. Let's take away the gold and the Peru first. Let's set our background color on the body to white, and Bootstrap shipped with the 900 value from their grayscale map. Let's go back to our Acme design composition. We're going to start with the masthead, and then we'll move on to the hero. Alright, masthead first. There's a similar component in Bootstrap that we can use, which is called navbar. Let's go get navbar's markup from the Bootstrap 5 website. Note that we're on the v5.getbootstrap.com. While version 5 is still in alpha and beta, you'll have to access it via this URL. We can go to the components. We can go to navbar. For this tutorial, I'll use this first block of markup code, and when I'm working in my masthead file, you'll notice that I've already deleted this disabled link, and I've already deleted this form. Let's move to the code editor. Let's close some of these files. I'll create a new file in the root called masthead.html. I'll paste in some starter code. Note that that shell class on line 10 is just a preference of mine, has nothing to do with Bootstrap, but we can work alongside it. Let's paste in our navbar. Alright, we have a navbar. We need to do a few things, right? We need to have an image for our logo instead of text. We need to have our nav items on their own line, and they need to be a purple color, similar to the logo. So we're a bit off. Let's make some changes to this. Let's open our web inspector to see what styles are applied where, and I'll select our navbar. I know we won't need this background color. I'm not sure if it comes through in the screen share, but there's a light background color behind our navbar. We won't need that. We can delete that background utility class from our HTML. We can add in our logo file that I've already cut up. And before writing any CSS, what can we change in our variables file, if anything? I already have a purple color called Valhalla, so I can go ahead and change the navbar light color to my named purple color. Great. And if we just want to see some things take place here, we also have options for hover, etc. So now I have gold options. Let me just put that back to the default for now. Okay. What else? What about our image? It should be on its own line. A couple different ways we could handle this. One way, if we inspect the navbar's container element, we can see that it is a flex parent. And we can see that our div that holds our navigation elements is 100%. So knowing a little bit about Flexbox, we could certainly just add a flex wrap property to this element. And we could just do this in the browser here, and if I add flex wrap, we can see our links wrap to the next line. I don't want this wrapping to happen at all breakpoints. I really just want this to happen when we're at the full-blown desktop navigation version. So I should infix that with my large infix, because that's when my navbar expands from a mobile to a desktop nav. Okay, we have our links on a new line. The spacing in between is not correct. Looking at our comp, I see a bit more space in between the navigation items. I go back to my comp and I inspect these items. I wonder if these values are in our variables file. Let me look at the padding that's assigned to the anchor here. And I see that there's half a rem for each of these. What if I click this navbar Sass file? With proper source mapping, we can see the source Sass files have, yes, they do use a variable value. So we can go ahead and not write CSS, we can just override these values. So why don't we override navbar navlink padding x. Navbar navlink padding x. Let's up this from half to maybe 1. Looks good. We never carried over our flex wrap property to our HTML, so I'll do that now so we can get that line break back. Alright, the links look a little more spaced out like our comp. That is good. What about this large image? Well, I know that Bootstrap doesn't provide any sort of sizing variables for a navbar logo because it's really not set up to contain a logo, but we want one. So this is a good point where we can start to write some of our own HTML that will integrate in and around Bootstrap's HTML. So since I've called this masthead, let me go ahead and wrap this in a couple classes. I'm going to wrap this in masthead, and then I want a masthead body. And then for our navbar, I'd like this wrapped in something related to our masthead too. I'll call that masthead brand. Refreshing does nothing yet, but we're going to give some classes to our masthead. So where could we put these? We could put these in our components or our layouts I think we agreed on. I have a folder called globals. Globals is a great area to have header and footer styles, so I can open up the masthead's Sass file that I have for our web project, and I can go ahead and add in some rules here. So we want to give a maximum width to the brand element, that div we surrounded. So let's go ahead and do that. I want it to be a max width of 140. That is good. I think we want some more space below the logo between the navbar items. We do. I can give some bottom spacing with a unit of just spacer, which will be 16 pixels or 1 rem. We'll talk about that in a moment. Let's go back to our HTML. We're missing some alignment here. How could we line this up? I can see that it's the link padding that's really what is not lining things up with the top. So that padding is 1 rem, or about 16 pixels. So this is a good place to talk about the benefit of Bootstrap's utility-based classes, specifically around spacing, margin, and padding. You'll see some existing utility classes that came from the navbar's code. A margin bottom with a unit of 2 and a margin bottom of 0 at a large breakpoint and up. We can leverage some of these classes specifically for alignment, including negative spacing. So for example, this information, by the way, is under the utilities section of the Bootstrap 5 documentation, and it explains how these are generated. But these tie closely to the spacing Sass map that exists in the Bootstrap's variable file. So unit of 3 represents 16 pixels if our initial spacer value is 1 rem, or 16 pixels. So a unit of 2, we can multiply that by half, which is 8 pixels, etc. So spacers ships with about 5 units, but I've expanded this to 12 since I anticipate I'll need a bit more spacing control. So we can leverage this pretty easily to align our nav. So if we go back to our masthead here, what did we say? We said our padding is about 1 rem on the left here, correct? So can we negative margin this by 1 rem, which would be a spacer of 3? The answer is yes, we can. And I can go ahead and add that in here. So I could say margin left, but only at the large breakpoint and above, I would like a negative 3 unit. Now we have some solid alignment with our navbar brand, which is our logo image, and our nav. When building sites with Bootstrap, they recommend using these utilities over custom Sass. It's not a requirement, it's their recommendation. I find that you do develop a bit faster when you use these utilities, but some of your team members may not like these. They may not mesh well with how people develop and how people have thought about developing with semantically and not using these classes. I'll take some time to ensure that we bring all of these sort of into our Sass files, but for now I'm going to continue using these utilities for our layout. Or maybe I can finish this off here. Let's remove this drop down. I think we had products, services, and about. I also like to add a little bit of padding to my component. I'll add some padding here to better match our comp. I will remove the drop-down indicator from this final item. And what about this padding? I mean, this is a hard value, but there's no reason why we can't have some of our components have their variable values in the same file. We can have them in the same variables file. So I'm going to go ahead and I've created some padding values for my masthead body here. I'll copy over this variable. And in fact, I might even use Bootstrap's responsive font sizing, which is really a resizing engine for these values, which we'll talk about in a moment. How are we looking on mobile? I know that Chrome has a mobile emulator, but sometimes I just like to use the docked inspector tools here. So not bad. I don't know if I love this border radius. I might remove that. That is another value in the variables file. Toggler border radius, I believe it's called. Here it is. Let's remove that. Zero that out. And the alignment here, I want this to be centered vertically, and I wonder why it's not. I have a feeling it has to do with margin on my brand. That's right. If I remove this to 0, now it's centered. So we can, let's just have that bottom margin that we added only occur at, let's have that only occur at the large break pointed up when there's the desktop nav. Let's see, let's refresh. Looking better. This is a bit tight now, though. I bet we just want some top margin. What if we could just add some top margin on this list, but only have it appear on mobile? We can do that with utility classes. And then maybe we don't want the margin top at the large breakpoint and above. Okay, looking better, looking better. Let's go back to desktop view. Refresh. Okay, looking pretty decent, I think, here. We might be able to move on. Actually, you know, this really makes no sense. We have margin bottom values and margin top values that interact at mobile and desktop. Can't we just, let's go ahead and just, let's remove this from our sheet for now. And can we just have a margin top rule? Really? So now, we only have a margin top rule. Mobile looks good. What about desktop? Here, maybe we can just widen this. Okay, did we remove our left? Yes, we removed our negative offset. So now, okay, we've cleaned that up a bit. Great. All right, yeah, we were just doing too much. Let's go to the hero. Our hero is purple. It has a gradient, a headline, subhead, button, this bottom border here, that's part of it. Previous versions of Bootstrap had the Jumbotron component. That's gone. We can write our own simply enough, though. We'll call it hero. But I wanted to talk a little bit about Bootstrap's HTML class naming methodology. They call it a base modifier methodology where, the best example is the button would be the base kind of component class that holds, common CSS properties. And then your modifier would be something like button primer, and it's hyphen separated. And this works well enough with Bootstrap's sort of minimal design out of the box here, but it doesn't really work in the real world for me, in my opinion. If you can imagine, say, you got a design comp for an offer box that had a price in it, and the price maybe had a modifier for, a holiday promotion, and you're sort of kind of in this weird area where you sort of have your base kind of block, but then you have an element that might be hyphen separated, and then, your modifier might be also hyphen separated. It just doesn't make sense. And then if you get into sort of sizing modifiers, so for this tutorial, I'm using sort of an ABEM or BEM methodology where, you have your block, and we'll do, we'll have elements, and then we can have modifiers. So it's not ideal, but this is how we're going to move forward. It's not the end of the world to mix and match, but I just wanted to call that out before we move on. So we're making the, conscious decision to kind of mix and match with that. All right, I've renamed our masthead.html file to acme.html. We can continue to add to this. So again, our hero is a headline, subhead, button, purple gradient, bottom border. Let's start with some markup. We're going to need a hero. Going to need a hero heading, a hero subheading, or something like a lead, which is more aligned with Bootstrap vernacular. We'll need a button. Let's use a button secondary modifier. We're going to need some copy. Copy for our heading. Copy for our paragraph or subhead, and some button copy. Hello world. And this should not be a div, this should be an anchor. What do we have here? Great. It's not in a container, so we need it in a container so we can have it centered on our page. Kind of nest that in there. Okay, we're getting closer. We're getting closer. Our heading doesn't go full width. Things seems to cut off a little more than halfway here. We could put a hard width in a hero Sass file, or we could use line breaks. I really just like to use Bootstrap's grid for things like this. So I'm gonna say, hey, at our XL breakpoint and above, can you just go across 8 units for all this content? And let's go ahead in a hero Sass file. Let's go ahead and give background color Peru. Maybe a padding bottom, padding top. Alright, why don't we use an H1, a headline 1 for our headline in the hero. Alright. Our hero heading's font weight is a little beefier in our comp. I could use a Bootstrap utility class, but let's just add a dedicated style in our hero Sass file. This font weight boulder variable is part of a series of weight-based variables Bootstrap ships with. Let's see if it worked. Okay, there's a boulder value, there's a bold value. That looks more in line with our comp, so maybe we reopen that file just to have a reference. Search for font weight boulder. Bootstrap ships with some of these, and I've modified some. Looks like I have a commented out variable, so I selected the 500 weight here. All right, what's next? Well, our button, we should see something here, so something must be wrong with our HTML. and it is. This needs to be the class attribute, and then we could just have an empty href. We could kill the border radius on the button. We could do that at a, well, let's just do it at sort of an environment or settings level. Let's kind of disable the rounded for our entire Acme site. Okay. And we can add now our background color or gradient based on our design comp. And we're going to use a couple helpers, a few tricks that Bootstrap provides that we don't have to do the work for this stuff. One of which is the tint color and shade color functions. They're Sass functions that Bootstrap provides. Some notes here are on the notes on Sass section as of this video. That's where they put this info under the color section. And we're going to use that in conjunction with their gradients mixin. Usually when someone does a gradient on your own web project, you probably write your own linear gradient, but we don't have to do that. There is a gradients file that you can see here, node modules, and Bootstrap has written these and they're available for us to use. So we're going to use the gradient directional variant. We'll have a start color, an end color, and a direction. And 45 degrees will actually match what we want. So we don't even need to include this third parameter, and it will output what we want here. So let's go back to our hero Sass file and include gradient directional. And why don't we include our Valhalla purple color, and it's going to go to a lighter version of our Valhalla color. Very cool, very cool. We also need a bottom border from our comp, right? It looks like there's a bottom border, and it looks like a darker shade than what our hero is. So let's go ahead and add that. We can use box shadow for this instead of border. And we can use the shade color function. Nice. What about our text color? What can we do about our text color here? Well, we can use a sick color function that Bootstrap provides called color contrast. We pass in an argument, and it's going to return a light or dark color value based on the argument we've passed. I've added this Valhalla purple color, and the color contrast function is going to use internal Sass magic and return a light color. So if we changed all these to something like gold, this is going to return a dark color. This is just magic of the color contrast function. You can see how that works if you want to dig into Bootstrap's Sass files in the functions file. It's included in here. It's great. I recommend you go check it out if you're curious. Okay, I've made some notes here to try to finish up this hero. Move on, move on, move on. All right, we need to make this button green to look like our comp, right? So let's go ahead and do that. So we can do a lot of this stuff again in our variables file. So let me go ahead and make our secondary color this green color, which is green. I've already inputted that. Put that there. Secondary maps to green. Secondary is going to map to secondary. And now this button is green. We need to make it a lighter font weight too. Okay. This can be normal. There's normal. It's a little bit lighter weight now, our button. That's great. Hero lead styles we can add in. Lead is our subheading. I can paste those in from another screen here. Give it a margin bottom, a different font size. We're going to use some responsive font sizing in our hero. Responsive font sizing is beyond font sizing. It also can responsively resize spacing, such as padding. We'll be using that too. It comes on by default with version 5. You can turn it off. You can use it two ways, through mixins or through function return values. We're going to just be using mixins. We're going to do something similar to this. Hey, instead of font size 4rems, we're going to say, hey, include font size 4rems. And then when you inspect in the browser, we'll see that it's calculating viewport widths below your certain max breakpoint. It's really great. It's really helpful. The functions declaration is down here below. And this can be configured. It ties in with the Bootstrap's variables file. I like to abstract some of my components out if I think there'll be different variations of them. That's what I'll do now. So, what if we wanted a dark version of this hero, or a version that had a background image? I mean, are we going to copy and paste a lot of these properties? So I'll go ahead and try to kind of condense some of this stuff into common mixins, such as we'll probably have like a hero mixin, and our hero doesn't have many styles now, but we can take, a top and bottom padding variable, and we can set that to something that would be set in our web project to be like, hey, specifically we have a top and bottom hero variable, so we can include that. And then all this mixin will do now, since we don't have much design, is, we can include the responsive sizing. The responsive sizing mixins that will responsively size not only font sizes, but in this instance, it's going to responsively resize paddings, which is going to be excellent. How many times have you, when developing a site, had to do a certain padding for mobile, a certain padding for tablet, and then for desktop, it's just for things like hero elements and layers, and it's just a pain. It's just a pain. So I really enjoy this feature. Okay, so I have a simple hero mixin, and then we're probably going to need something like a mixin for like our variant. And this is very close to how Bootstrap actually sets up some of their blocks and modifiers. Like they have mixins dedicated to, I believe, like buttons and say a button variant. I think they even call their button variant mixin the same exact thing I am. And our variant's going to take things like our background color that we want to pass, and maybe it'll take another argument of like, what about the hero inset, that bottom border? Should it always be 6 pixels? Well, it can be by default, but we can change that if we want to for other heroes. And then we can kind of move some of this stuff in there. So our gradient can now be, instead of gold, we can set it to background, and whatever we pass as background can be tinted, can be lightened a little bit, so the right side's a little bit lighter. Box shadow we can also bring up in here, and we can interpolate a Sass variable to properly output our hero inset value that will come from the that we pass. Also need to change this. And the big magic that we love is that color contrast, which is going to return light or dark based on whatever is passed in this mixin. So that'll be super convenient. So we can kill this. We can keep these. These are our custom styles. We can keep these here. So let's just save and make sure we haven't just blown everything up. And now we should really see nothing. Right, so now if we want something like Hero Halloween, we could do something like, hey, I want you to include the hero variant mixin, and how about orange for a Halloween color? And then for a hero inset, let's do the default 6 pixels right now. We could have just omitted this, but let's just pass that in. See if we get a Halloween hero here. And let's just change the HTML class in our HTML file. Where did you go? So we'll change this to be hero Halloween, please. Halloween. Cool. So that's cool. We have our Halloween style here, but what do we forget? We forgot to include the base mixin in our base selector. So we want to include hero, which for now, again, is very simple. It's really only including padding as of now. But as you expand some of your components, you might certainly want a mixin for the base element along with what you might do in some of these variants. So now, what is our padding using our hero variant class, or excuse me, using the hero mixin? We set it to padding Y, which is going to be hero padding Y. What did we set our hero padding Y to be? Hero padding Y. We set it to be layer padding Y. Layer padding Y is going to be spacer times 6, which I know is 16 times 6 is 96 pixels about, so let's scope that out. We're looking at 96. Let's check out the cool part of responsive font sizing. As we bring this down to a mobile view, it's no longer 96. There's a viewport calculation that goes on in here. And now our padding is around 50. So we went from 96 to 50 in that tablet. We're gracefully growing up and up and up and up. We can do the same thing for font sizes. And I think out of the box, Bootstrap is doing that if I'm looking at this. Our font size here is set where? Let's check this out. Yeah, this comes direct from, this comes default out of the box with Bootstrap 5. We didn't even have to touch the headline. They're going ahead and they're setting a responsive font size implementation on the headlines. You can turn that off, you can override that, but by default for this tutorial, we don't have to do anything. So both our headline and our padding is resizing gracefully in our hero, which is really cool and really helpful. So I could move some of these heroes out of this components file and move those more to abstracts. So I already have a file set up for this, so I could put these here, and now my mixins can be organized where they belong inside an abstracts mixins folder. Is there anything else I need to move? Maybe my comments, we can remove those. And now we just have the stuff that really controls our hero. So we could clean this up with our final hero styles and maybe add in a couple others just to see differences in color and, you know, our bottom border or box shadow. So let me put that in our Sass file. And in our Acme HTML file, I'll copy in some other hero code. So we have a primary, secondary light, and you can see that these match up to our colors, and you know the text color is going to be automatic based on what the color has been fed into the mixin. It's going to use the color contrast function, and we have different bottom borders, which is excellent, and this is fun, and now we can move on. Next up is the cat layer. We'll use Bootstrap's grid, some negative offsets, and we'll design a custom button. You know, how can we have a custom button style that can work alongside the default button set that Bootstrap gives us? Let's get started. All right, back in our Acme page, I can start to create the cat layer. So we're going to need to contain it in a container. It's not going edge to edge, right? In the comp, we have the color not going edge to edge. So I'm going to continue my BEM style classes here. You know, we have a layer. It's not a hero, but we'll call it a layer, similar to a hero. We'll call it a layer dark and its modifier. You know, we're going to need a grid, right? And we're going to need some grid classes here. So I'm going to do a call 5. You know, adjacent that, let's do a call large 7. Within each of these, you know, we have some headlines here. I think we have hello world. Maybe some paragraph text with some more mipsum I can grab here. maybe a little more than that. How about that? And then inside the area where the cat is, we're going to need an image. Assets, image cat.jpg. See what we have. Very cool. We have the grid laid out. We already have a color in place too, because I've skipped ahead here and I've created a layer Sass file that lives in the components directory, also where our hero lives. So in here I've done a similar thing to hero. I have an abstracted mixin that I'm including here, and then I have a couple modifiers. I have one for dark and have one for light. So let's see what those mixins look like in our layer mixins file. I can bring them into the same file. So very similar to hero. I've created a sort of a base mixin that just takes in a padding value that exists in our Bootstrap variables file. And the variant is going to just really leverage the background color, and it's going to set the color to be a bit dynamic. It'll either be a light or dark text color in this cat layer based on whatever the light or darkness of the background color is. So for the dark variant we have on the screen to the right, we're passing in a dark navy blue color, and color contrast function is smart enough to output a white color for us. Looks like I also have a light variant for our heroes. So I would suspect if I copy this and create a light, we see a light variant. So it's nice to think in those systematic ways to be a little future-proofed. You know, I might need, you know, the design comp you receive might not receive kind of these variants, but you can quickly sort of start from a place where you can easily extend, and your text color can sort of adapt along with it. Let's go back to our layers mixin file. We can close this. We can go back to our layers styles that exists in our components directory. I don't need these mixins in here. They make more sense to me in the abstracts mixins directory for layer. So let's refresh our page. Okay, we're still a bit off though. We need this, you know, the image was offset. We had a funky button. We're missing the button. Maybe we do the button at the end. So let's continue on with how we can achieve the design. So I know that I'm going to need to really, you know, if you look at the comp, the blue sort of extends beyond our site's container. And the cat sort of extends out of the container. The content seems to line all the way up, though. How can we ensure this as we move forward? So let's go back to our text editor. Well, I know that at this level I can leverage some margin utilities. Let me do a -5 unit on the left and right. So now we've effectively pulled this out a little bit more. So at widescreens we're getting closer to the comp that we had. But we need some padding now too. So let's go ahead and include also maybe some left and right padding that matches that negative offset. Okay, getting even better here. And let's take a look at the comp. I think that's pretty close. I think we were able to really hit that with some utility-based negative margin and padding to accommodate that, the design. What about this image? What can we do about the image over there? Well, I think we're going to need to wrap this in another element here. And we'll call it, we'll just give it a div for now. And we're going to need some offset on the bottom and on the right. So why don't we start with the bottom? Let's do a -8 unit. Let's pop the image inside that container. Let's see what happens here. Okay, that's a little better. What about the right though? We need to worry about the right as well. Okay, 8 looks pretty good on the right, but the bottom is still suffering. What about 12? Great, 12 looks pretty good. You know, Bootstrap only ships with units up to 5, but that's why I really kind of expanded the spacing map for my project, for this Acme project, to really account for all of those increased spacings that I might need, and it worked out in this instance. So our cat looks pretty good here. Looks good at wide screens. At this screen, it's a little wacky, huh? Let's see if we can kind of fix this. So I'm at, what width am I at here? If I resize this, I'm about in the top right there. I see I'm at 1263, 1265. What if I have this use the XXL? This might be a better fit here, where I'm using the largest XXL container variant or modifier for this, and I think that's going to be a better fit. I'm pretty happy with that, but I'm not happy with this crawl bar I see down here, and it looks to be maybe due to the image. So can we leverage a, what if we leverage a margin right negative offset that only takes place at the XXL breakpoint and above? That's more what I would like and expect to see. So why don't we go back to our HTML. Let's put the XXL there. Let's use the XXL container. Let's refresh. Let's add a little content under this cat layer just so we can see a little bit of a bottom buffer. We can use a layer light modifier that I've created, and let's get our container, and let's just put in some lorem ipsum. All right. Just gives us a better view of kind of what's going on here. So we need our custom button styles next. So let's create a div, and let's go ahead and put in a button that comes out of Bootstrap by default. Let's call it Cat's Hello World. Okay, so yes, we have these default buttons. You know, we have primary and secondary and things like danger. Things like button info that have all different colors. Let's call our button, since it's a little wacky, let's call it button whack. And we have no styles. So let's go into our components, and I've created a buttons Sass file here. So we're keeping the base, we're keeping that base button class on there, right? BTN. So we're going to inherit some stuff in here. So if I inspect this, you know, we have some padding and stuff that's inheriting. We're going to leverage some of that stuff. So let's create a button whack class here. And what are some things we know we need? Well, we need that really wacky ornament. So I can go ahead and add a pseudo element in for that. And let me do position relative, and I'm going to really just put in the styles for that. It's an orange square with some like an outline. So let's put all that in. Just give me a moment here. Box shadow on this pseudo element. It'll be white. The height of that thing was about 16 pixels. Don't think we'll need a left property. We will want a right property about 8 pixels. Top, it's a little offset as well. And it's square, so let's match the height. Okay, we're getting there. And for the button itself, what do we need? Well, we need to give it some padding, some border radius, some, you know, a text uppercase, I believe we had in our comp. So let's just put in that uppercase. And, you know, I want to leverage, I want to work off of Bootstrap. I want to work with it. I don't sort of want to reinvent the wheel. So I can use some of Bootstrap's mixins that they use in their Sass. You know, I can use things like button variant as a mixin and things like button size at the bottom. I'm going to leverage these, and I'm going to include those in my Sass, and I'll let you look at how these work on your own, but they're going to be in your node modules folder, so you can go look at this stuff. So I'm going to include the button size mixin. And I want to have consistent padding with others in terms of the y-axis. Same for the x-axis. I want it to be a little bit larger in its font size. And I need to pass just a null value for the border radius. Earlier in this tutorial, we disabled that global border radius setting. So this mixin expects a border radius value as part of this. We could just put in null here. Let's see if we're making any progress. Okay, so we're getting a bit closer to our comp. Learn more. Let's go back. What else do we need? I can also use the Bootstrap button variant mixin. And what can I pass in here? Well, I can pass our custom color, right? I can use an HSL value of 184. And then I need another parameter for the hover background. Let's just do purple. And there's another variable we can supply for the hover border. Let's make it also purple. How are we looking? We're not looking good. Do we have a compilation error? We do. Mixin button variant is missing argument border. I need to pass two colors here. One is for the background and another is for the border. And now we're compiling. If you're wondering what I'm talking about, if we look at Bootstrap's button variant mixin, it accepts a number of Sass arguments. Some of them are required, some of them are optional. Background and border are required. Those are the first two here. We disabled border radius globally earlier in this tutorial in the variables file, so we need to add a custom border radius property for this button. And the letter spacing is a little bit wider than what is typical. We can add that in too. And we had a padding right that was a little more blown out. Where and more? Extra padding on the right, the ornament. Let's go back. Our ornament doesn't look right here. It needs to be higher. So we need to add, negative top does nothing, so we can add -8 pixels. Okay. Maybe we could change the button copy to match what's in the comp. The headline should be a little bigger. Bootstrap gives you classes for each of their heading levels, so you can match sizes easier. Some people don't like that. If I was carrying over my convention here, I would have something like a layer heading, since that's an element of our component here. What else could we do? Let's take a look at this on mobile. We have no spacing in between each of our column elements here. Gutter utilities. Bootstrap 5 gives you great gutter utility classes that also map to that spacing unit Sass map. So I can add in a y-axis utility of 6, refresh. You don't see anything in the desktop version, but on mobile, you'll now have margin in between your columns in your grid. So now we have margin here. Super helpful, makes it super easy to prototype quickly. Looks good on desktop and looks good on mobile. We should be a bit more thorough though and add proper spacing from the comp. There's more spacing under this headline and there's more spacing under this paragraph. So we can control that in our code base if we would like. So if I have a layer heading class and a layer copy class, we can give some bottom margin to each of those. Yeah, let's duplicate this and have copy. Maybe a little more on the that's about right. Great. Let's build out the final layer with our icons and columns. We'll then refactor the code because some people might want to see that. Some people do not like utility classes in their HTML, so we can work with that. We can take those out for the purposes of this tutorial, and then we'll conclude. Okay, our icon layer has a headline and it has 4 columns with some orange icons. Let's go ahead and get started. Let me just show you how I'm including Font Awesome in this project. It's a little out of the scope of what we're talking about, but I'll just show you anyway. I include the free version of Font Awesome in my package JSON. You can see it here. From there, if we go into our Sass entry point, I import the Sass files from Font Awesome in my vendor directory. Here's all those Sass files. I specify the path in my abstracts folder, variables. This is the path where the fonts can be found, and this is referencing node modules. And then I have a iconography Sass file where I only include the icons I'm using to avoid file bloat. This seems a little all over, but when you get larger projects, kind of having this differentiation with all your different vendor files, I find is helpful. So for our icon set, let's get started. We're going to need a headline. I think it was real lorem ipsum all the time. And then I'm going to need, we can call it, let's call it icon set. And we'll probably have an icon set item. And within that, we'll probably have an icon set asset that will hold our icon. And that will have a Font Awesome file. And then I'll have a div. Let's see if my emmet worked. No, my emmet did not work. You have an idea of the structure. Let's just paste in the final markup here. So we have some icon sets with icon set items and assets and all things BEM and all things good. So we're going to need some styles, but we can do a couple on the headline here. So we can leverage a couple native Bootstrap classes like display 4 and text center. We can create a Sass file in our architecture here in components. I have one created. It's called icon set. And what would we need in here? Let's have an icon set that sets its text to center. We want our asset or icon to be orange. We want a large font size for our icons and some margin. And at the breakpoint medium and above, we're going to, instead of using those HTML Bootstrap grid classes, we're going to use their mixins that they provide that do the same thing. We're including a mixin to allow this div to become a row. We're including mixins to become a column. We're giving it a designation, a unit at the medium breakpoint, at the large breakpoint. We're giving it a width. Let's see where we're at. Really good shape. Utility class is bad. Utility class is good. I'm not here to argue whether you should use utility classes or not. Bootstrap ships with them in their HTML. They advocate their usage. I am here to just refactor the code at the end of this tutorial with you to not use any utility classes. You can use Bootstrap. You don't have to use utility classes. We could start from the bottom where we left off here with the icon set. Let's get rid of some of these utility classes. So display for I consider almost an atom. I'm going to leave that, but I am going to remove this text center. We no longer have text centering. I'm going to move it in icon set. This messes with our flex property. What could we do here? Well, we could make an icon set wrapper element that is really dedicated to flexing the elements within. So I could just nest these in something like icon set wrapper, and I could call this icon set heading, right? And then in our Sass, we can then, where do we flex this? We flex this at the medium breakpoint and up. So what we could do is we could say, I don't want you to flex the kind of the base element. Let's flex that wrapper element. So we could kind of drop this in that element. Good. We no longer have that text center class there. Are we using any other utilities in icon set? I don't think so. I see a little weird indentation here that's going to kill me that this exists. Okay, we fixed that final div. It was just our shell div that was not properly closing. So back on track. Let's close this light layer that contains our icon set and move on. Let's go up to our cat layer. Right out of the gate, we have some spacing ones. So we have a -5 unit and a 5 unit on padding for left and right. So how could we handle this? Well, we know we need to get these out of there first of all. I don't want to hang those spacing classes on layer. Layer is going to be commonly used. I don't even want to hang them on dark. I probably would create a new layer, and cat's probably a bad idea. What if cat goes away? What if it's a different image? Animals is probably not much better. What about, we could be here all night with naming. I'll just call it accent for now. So if I refresh, you can see that we have some work to do. So I'll open up my layer. And what were those spacing classes again? They were a unit of 5. So let me go back to my layer Sass file. Let's create another rule for accent. And we had a margin left rule of spacer times 5, but it was negative, remember. We can carry over that to right. I don't combine them. That's just my preference. Padding left was a spacer, also 5. Padding right, spacer 5. Refresh. That's too much. What happened? Well, you have to remember 5 doesn't translate to this is not the right math. If we go to our variables file, remember now, 5 is just the key, but what we really want is spacer times 2, which would yield 32 pixels. So we should change 5 to 2, and that's going to be, what did we say? About 32 pixels. So I hit save, I hit refresh, perfect. Back to the HTML. We have grid classes. Let's create a layer wrapper. I don't love this class either, but for this tutorial, it's fine. And let's create a layer main element, and we can call our layer assets. How about asset? These are elements of this block. And in here, we're going to need our content. Let's just bring that up. Getting rid of all utility classes here. And then what? Our image. So layer, layer wrapper, layer main, layer asset. And these were at the large breakpoint we were doing the grid. So back to the Sass. We need what? We need our breakpoint declarations. We need some Bootstrap Sass mixins for grid, which they give us, by the way. If you go to layout, grid, and forgive me if I've shown you this earlier in the tutorial, they have the HTML utility classes, you might call those. They have mixins. They can provide those for you here. You can read about them here. So, what do we need? We need a main selector. We need an asset selector. We need a breakpoint include. And we said it was at large, not medium. And let's nest this. We want to apply the grid at the large breakpoint. Let's make that include make row. We need to make this call ready for each of these elements. And then we need to give it a unit. And I forget the units. What were our units? 5 and 7. Okay, 5 and 7. Save. Let's copy these here because we will need to remember those, and I don't have a good memory. So let's cut out our Bootstrap grid markup. Let's carry over just this. We're going to need this grid gutter utility unit to remember. Okay, now I think we can delete this, right? Boom. Let's cross our fingers. Okay, we are flexing. We are gridding. We just need to apply those offsets, those negative offsets. So, XL and XXL, N8 and 12. I am a big fan of nesting. And I just tried it without nesting, and it does turn out we do need it. I should have trusted my instincts, but we need an element around this. So we can give it a terrible, terrible name of, how about asset offset? And we can create some rules in here. So we need this to occur at XL and XXL, right? So let's at least get that far. XL, XXL, and we're trying to affect what selector? What did I call it? Offset? We're almost there. We're almost there. I called it offset. Okay, so let's nest this in here. And what are we trying to affect? At the XL margin bottom, and we want negative spacer times 8, not 12. 12 is 8 right here. 12 is just a key. So we want margin bottom of negative spacer times 8, and at XXL we want right. Yes. Yes, yes, yes. Kill that. What about the space in between vertically at mobile? GY6, 6 unit. Same thing. Works off the same spacers map. So we have main, we have asset. We need to affect this at 6 is what? Spacer times 2.5. Let's have our main have a bottom margin at all breakpoints, and then at large we can zero that out. Nice, 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 nice. So yeah, a little more Sass here for sure. Breaking in and out of breakpoints, all sorts of stuff. Pros and cons of using utility classes versus writing your own Sass. But did we just take care of the entire cat layer, which is now the accent modified layer? I think we have. I'm going to leave H1 for there for now. I consider that an atom if you're thinking in atomic designs mindset. Very cool. Let's move up to hero primary. This is going to be more of the same. Let's create a hero wrapper class. And let's just call it hero main, which will contain our content. We're affecting the XL breakpoint and above. Gonna paste some stuff from my previous sheet just to have it handy. And what did we say? Make row for the hero wrapper. And then we're talking about making a column ready and a unit for the main. And I must have the worst memory ever. It was 8. 8. 8. So we can have this as a unit of 8 using the grid mixin 4 columns. Remove all this. Something's wrong, something's wrong. We're no longer in hero. Looks like our Sass is a little bit structured differently from, say, the nesting we've done in other Sass files. Shame on me. Perhaps I'll fix that before I commit this to the repo that I'll link to. We have a typo. This needs to be wrapper. Cool. Hero is done. Let's just look now actually at how we're nesting. Layer, modifiers there, elements. Let's take this out and clean that up. Hero there, modifiers. Perhaps we can move those into match layer, huh? Let's be a little bit cleaner. And really, I like to put my modifiers kind of after the elements, but let's just match the layers file for now. So very cool. Everything's still good. Everything's still good. On to the navigation, which has a good amount, or I think. Oh yeah. Well, actually, it's not that bad. We only have a few things here to mind. So let's call flex large wrap. Flex large wrap. Let's call this masthead wrapper. And our masthead is in globals. Flex large wrap, right? So we will need the mixin breakpoint for the large. Flex large wrap. Flex wrap. Wrap. Okay. And then we have some spacing utilities on our navbar nav. Let's call this masthead element navbar nav. Multiple word with hyphen separation is okay in some flavors of BEM. So let's get those spacing units in our clipboard. Masthead navbar nav. Masthead navbar nav. Masthead navbar nav. So we need a margin right auto, and at the large breakpoint a -3. We want margin top to be spacer 4. Spacer 4 is what? Spacer 4. Margin top, spacer 1.5. And then at the large breakpoint, we want a margin left of -3. At the large breakpoint, we want a margin left value of -3. Three is the base spacer. We don't even need to multiply anything. We did something wrong. Okay, so something's wrong with the wrapping. Okay, so masthead wrapper. We're not seeing a class. Oh, it's getting overwritten by what? Our masthead wrapper class is getting overrode by a native Bootstrap property dedicated to navbar. So in instances like this, I am going not to use an important rule in CSS, but rather try to include my web project's HTML classes further into the HTML. So they're targeting direct children container classes of navbar. So I'm going to go back to the HTML, and where is the navbar class? Well, the navbar class is here. Well, I'll make my own masthead navbar. And then I need to target a direct child of container, masthead navbar, masthead wrapper. So, masthead navbar, masthead wrapper. I'm inclined to do something like this, maybe even something like this. Very cool. Didn't even need the direct selector, but we could put that in if we wanted. Might leave it out, might leave it in. All right. Did we do it? Did we do everything? I think we've, and I know the color's a little off, that's okay. I think we've matched the comp using Bootstrap, using our own classes, extending using a variables file, created our own Sass architecture that only includes what we need from Bootstrap. It's never done because we could check mobile, right? Let's check mobile. Let's go down to 375 here-ish. I'm feeling pretty good. I hope you're feeling pretty good. I think we've used Bootstrap through NPM, used our own HTML classes, leveraged only the Sass we need, added on top of it. We've done it. I really hope this was helpful to you. The goal was to take a design composition and try to use Bootstrap to implement it without sort of sacrificing your HTML and what you think you know and what you might not know and some fears you might have. So I hope this is great. It's really, in my opinion, totally possible to use Bootstrap in your own web projects. It's going to take time. You're going to mess up. You're going to learn. You're going to have to look at documentation. And wow, much respect to screencasters. I can't count the amount of times I had to start and stop this thing and edit audio. And wow, just have a newfound respect for people that do tutorials. So thank you to you all out there. My name is Marcel. I work for a web agency in Massachusetts in the United States called iMark. Thanks.